and gentlemen, welcome to Man in America. I'm your host, Seth Holhouse. So, farmers are sounding the alarm. A collapsing supply chain, skyrocketing fuel prices, fertilizer shortages, devastating weather patterns, soaring animal feed costs, bird flu, swine flu, and spontaneous combustion of processing facilities. These are all creating a catastrophic food crisis beyond our imagination. And folks, don't be fooled by the full shelves at your local grocery store. The crisis is just months away. So on today, we're going to be going over this critical update. So before we get started, folks, if you're not following me on social media, make sure you are. I'm primarily on Telegram and Truth Social as Man in America. So make sure you're following me there. Today's show is brought to you by Rise TV. The viewers of Rise TV are the reason why I can do Man in America full time. With the big tech, censorship, the demonetization, they've made it really tough for people like me that have a mission to tell the truth. And that's why we built Rise TV. Because folks, right now we are at war and it's an information war. Man in America is how I am in this fight. So over on Rise TV, we have a massive content library and an amazing community of patriots. So if you want to check it out, there's a link in the description for a free trial. The second half of today's show, we're going to be going into a deeper Q&A discussion about prepping, food preparation, etc. So make sure you're over on Rise TV for that. I think you're going to love it. And folks, look, I believe we have some very rough times ahead of us. In fact, they're already here. And as you'll see in today's show, many signs are pointing towards an utter collapse of our food system, which will certainly affect our financial system. A lot of folks are seeing this coming and are looking for ways to protect their wealth. And I've always been one to recommend physical gold and silver. And if you're interested in this, I'm confident in recommending Noble Gold. So you can buy gold and silver directly from Noble Gold, or you can do an IRA transfer. So Noble Gold specializes in these IRA transfers, which allow you to transfer your IRA money into physical gold and silver that you own with zero taxes or penalties. So if you want to learn more about this, open up a new tab right now and go to goldwithseth.com, or you can call 877-646-5347. Again, it's 877-646-5347. And folks, the people over at Noble Gold will walk you through every step. They'll hold your hand. They'll answer all your questions. Even if you're just curious about how it works, give them a call. They'll be happy to talk to you with no obligations at all. They will take good care of you. So again, go to goldwithseth.com or call 877-646-5347. All right, folks, today is what I say to be a critical update, which it absolutely is. And look, I know that if you turn on the mainstream media, even go to the government websites, which I'll be showing you, they're not talking about how important this is with our foods crisis. Actually, a lot of times they're not even talking about it. Or as you'll see in the show today, the USDA is saying there is no food crisis and there isn't going to be a food crisis. Right. And I know that everyone's focused on the fact that Elon Musk tweeted today about voting Republican and how there's a red wave coming. And yes, we're all focused on the things that as patriotic Americans, we should be focused on. But I think that in the coming months, we're going to have to really redefine what it means to be a patriot and go back to the original patriots that were able to survive and feed their families and sustain themselves, because this is the time that we're in. So I'm going to start with a video, which is a woman that is reading a post from a farmer. And this is very telling. And so I please pay attention to this video. And if you want to share today's episode, even if your friends or family or parents, whatever, don't really like Man in America or they're really hard to reach, just play this video for them. Fast forward this little segment and play this video, because this is important. And this is a message that all Americans need to be hearing, and really people around the world, because this is affecting the whole world. But this is a message that Americans need to be hearing. And that's in a lot of ways why I'm doing this show, because I really believe that if we can prepare for what's coming, it will make a significant difference. So why don't you go ahead and just check this out. Let me play this for you. And I'm going to go ahead and full screen this. All right.
But anyway, she says to me, really the cost of eggs for us to produce them is not surprising at $12 a dozen. A bulk bag of feed last year was $185. Now I pay $430. I'm godsmacked at the comments on different channels about farmers ripping people off on egg prices. Shows people are not paying attention to what is happening. Wake up, people. We no longer sell our eggs and will downsize our poultry again, as we've been warned feed is going up again. Well, I will keep enough hens and roosters to increase my flocks again in spring for our consumption. The problem is people do not understand how their food is produced. What farmers produce this year is for next year's consumption. I roll my eyes when I hear people say there are no food shortages and our meat aisle is almost full. It's just fear-mongering. People using their grocery store as a gauge of their family's food security will pay dearly for their ignorance. Yes, there is meat in store. Now look deeper. Last year's low crop yields, crop losses, and hay losses across North America resulted in massive downsizing of livestock across Canada and the US. No hay, inability to get hay, or skyrocketing feed prices was the result of last year's harvests. First time, all 4 prairie provinces, and this would be Canada, were hit with losses at the same time. Hay never made it to market as it was bought up locally. Many farmers downsized, keeping enough breeders to start up again in the spring. This caused a glut in the market. Then late winter, another downsizing took place as feed prices rose again. That is why you are still not seeing it in the meat aisle. Many small farmers were wiped out, and others can no longer afford to grow for market, both in Canada and the USA. We keep only enough to feed our family, and many other small farmers did the same across North America. Now look at the big picture. That many animals taken out of production are not reproducing this year to replenish the market. Not enough animals to meet supply demand. You are looking at 18 months to raise up a steer and 8-10 months a pig. Don't forget now, farmers need to keep what they breed to build up livestock again if they want to continue farming. Feed prices make that unlikely. Many countries have closed exports of food. Same situation as us. Look it up. So no way to replenish the losses. It costs more to feed the animals than what you can sell them for, not including your labor and transportation to market. Remember those fuel hikes? Farmers grow it, but truckers haul it to market. Are you seeing the true picture yet? No different with the grains, cereal crops, cooking oils, etc. Now look at this year's spring seeding of fields. Notice any fields not planted? The cost of fuel, seed shortages, remember last year's crop losses and low yields, parts shortages, fertilizer shortages. What you are seeing in stores is from last year's harvest. You will see meat and other shortages by August. Not enough supply to meet demand and no way to import to make up for it. So meat will not be affordable even if you could get it. Poor yields and crop losses this year will compound this disaster. So the next time somebody tells you there's going to be severe shortages come winter, believe them. Ask a farmer. Now, it's comments like this from farmers who are dealing with this, and yes, they may be small farmers, and yes, the small farmers are the ones that are going to get wiped out first, but you take them out of the market, it certainly is going to make a big difference, and we know that there are issues with not enough chickens, so you're not going to get eggs. We know that there are problems with baby food supply. And the list just goes on and on and on and on. And it is a situation where one thing affects the other. Obviously, gas prices are going to make everything increase as well. We are headed for trouble. And how deep it's going to be, we don't know. Can we survive it? Of course we'll survive it. How much pain is there going to be? That's the question.
So I do appreciate how she ended that. She says, will we survive it? Yes, we will survive it. How much pain is there going to be? That is the question. So, folks, there's a few important takeaways from this. One is that you might go to your local grocery store. I do a lot of the grocery shopping for my family. Um, so I'm oftentimes at whether it's Whole Foods or local Kroger or the farm market, ideally. But you walk in and it might feel like, you know what, there's a food crisis coming, but maybe this shelf is bare or there's not as many eggs, there's not as much milk. And that's the thing, is that for a lot of people and a lot of Americans, unless it's right in front of our face, like unless it's right here getting ready to bite us, we ignore it. And that's not how we've always been, but it's how we've been bred to be. The modern American, we're focused on the modern conveniences, and you go onto Amazon, you press a button and your package shows up tomorrow. That's just how we live. So it's really easy to go to the local grocery store and feel like there's not really an issue. And maybe you're hyper aware of this and you're talking to your friends and your family, as I am quite often. You're saying, look, Dad, how much food do you have, man? Like, do you have some canned goods set aside? Do you know what's coming down the pipeline, et cetera? And maybe similar to what I've experienced, a lot of people are like, yeah, I've heard about the food crisis, but I've got I've got some extra canned goods. And a lot of people, they're not really seeing it because they still go to their local grocery store and it feels kind of the same. But that's the important point, is that what we're seeing right now is everything that came from last year. And that's the point that she makes here. And my wife was listening to Scott Kesterson over at Bard's recently. He was talking about how basically there's this 18-month production cycle. And then a lot of what we're seeing now was really started 18 months ago, meaning that when the compounding effect of the Ukraine war, the supply chain issues from COVID, all those things, it didn't really hit until the beginning of this year. And it's really starting to peak right now, especially if you look at the weather patterns that are happening in America. There's some really crazy stuff. It's why my show got rescheduled to today, because there's this new storm called a derecho, I think, which was this massive, it's almost like a hurricane on land. I never knew about these. I never had these growing up in Ohio. It's a wall of rain. I shared some pictures of it on my Telegram channel, Man in America. Everything is just upsetting. It's the perfect storm that's brewing. And so in today's show, I'm going to talk a lot more about what she said. I'm going to look at what the government is telling us to do, which is jack squat. The government's saying the solution to food crisis is make sure your kid's a transgender. That's about where the government's at, right? Or you can't have a gun. Okay, so we can't rely on our government, which I'm going to get into that. But I'm also going to spend the second half of the show, and a lot of it's going to be on the public platforms before we do the Q&A over on Rise TV. But I'm going to talk about prepping, and not just, not prepping in the broad sense about, water supply and guns, ammos, batteries, et cetera. But I'm going to talk specifically about food production, because while this is a big, scary, just monster that's coming towards us, I don't want to just come to here and say, hey, folks, there's a monster coming and hopefully you don't die, right? I want to say, hey, here's how we can get through this, right? It's going to be difficult, but here's how we can get through it. So I'm going to be talking about how to prep on a super, super budget. Even if you have no money, how to still prep, right? And put aside away food for your family, all the way up to, if you have more money, what can you be doing, et cetera. Talk about what I'm doing. So we're going to be talking extensively about that, because I think that's important. And the more you can get proactive in changing your situation, the better you're going to feel, the happier you're going to be. And you're going to feel like, you know what? This is difficult, but I think I'm going to be ready for it. But I'm going to first jump into what is happening at the global level, because a lot of these big organizations like the World Economic Forum, the WHO, they broadcast what's happening, and they will tell you what they want to happen, similar to Event 201, right? So they're telling us a lot. So I'm going to take a look at this article, and this is from New York Post, and I'll pull this up for you. And this was kind of a crazy article, but so food shortages could be just as deadly as the global pandemic. So what we have right here, I'm going to just read this for you. So this gentleman is he's the Global Fund Executive Director. I just want to read a little bit about this because this helps really frame what's happening. So a leading global health figure has warned the next worldwide health crisis could come in the form of food shortages as the price of basic supplies skyrockets in even the wealthiest of nations. So Peter Sands, he's the executive director of the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, Tuberculosis, and Malaria. He's probably good buddies with Bill Gates. So anyway, he said he believes a food shortage could be just as deadly as an airborne pandemic if authorities fail to prepare. So according to Sands, after 2 years of completely restructuring the world upon the emergence of a respiratory virus, governments now have to prepare for an even more complicated beast. Australia is already beginning to see early signs of food stress as lettuce prices hit an incredible $12 per head. Imagine paying $12 per head of lettuce in some areas following the flood season. Natural disasters coupled with inflations and complications in the global trade industry could produce a perfect storm as the globe begins to find its feet. And that's it, folks. It's a perfect storm. Let me pull this up for you because this is even more concerning. So here we're over on the Russian propaganda website RT, which actually happens to be way more truthful than most American media, where the World Trade Organization is warning of what they call a polycrisis. So you gotta love that, though. These elites, if you want to call them that, the scoundrels, they always invent these new words to tell us what's happening to our world. So now there's a polycrisis, right? It's the first time in the whole world that history that there's been multiple crises at once. So they're gonna call it a polycrisis, and they're gonna say that this is the excuse for a one world government. And I'm framing this for you so we're getting into what that means. So I'm not going to try to pronounce this woman's name. So this woman who heads up the WTO says the world is facing a food and fuel crisis and export controls are making it worse. Well, thanks, Biden. It's all planned. So what she says, export restrictions are pushing up food prices and could further exacerbate the global polycrisis. World Trade Organization Director General said in the opening of the conference this past Sunday. So according to the official, the world has become more complex since the last ministerial meeting back in 2017, given the lingering COVID-19 pandemic, Russia's military operation in Ukraine, and the ensuing food and energy crisis, which they all happen to be strangely tied together, almost as if it was planned. Maybe it was. I don't know. So she says, this polycrisis is really unprecedented and what is very central. So folks, just listen to this. Listen to what she's saying here. What is very central to all of this is that no one country can solve this crisis on its own. This is the time that you need the world working together. You need global solidarity. You need a one world government. That's what she said, quietly, I'm sure. So this is where they're taking this. And the point that I'm really trying to make with this is that America's been through a lot. We've been through multiple wars. We've been through the Great Depression, but things are different now. If you look back at World War I, World War II, right? So there were food shortages in America because America was actively involved in both of those wars. And one of the roles of America in those wars was to send food overseas, both to our own troops or to the Allied troops. And so America had to kick into gear to produce enough food to not only feed our nation, but also to feed a war that was happening on the other side of the world. At that time, the government started what they initially called war gardens, and they became the victory gardens. So the government was actively encouraging its own citizens to grow their own gardens. And it wasn't just encouraging them. I mean, they were going to schools. They were getting school children involved. That's what I said earlier. Like now they're telling kids, that maybe you're a girl, maybe you're a house cat, maybe you're actually a dolphin, right? They're teaching our kids destructive, terrible things. You rewind a little bit, and they were actually teaching kids how to garden. So because they knew how important that was, because the government at that time cared for the people that it represented. And after World War II, during the peak of the victory gardens, these gardens in the American backyards, and they're saying, look, plant a garden anywhere you can plant a garden. Plant a garden. If it's your front yard, if it's your backyard, it's your side yard, if it's a little patch of grass out by your mailbox, grow a garden. That's the beautiful thing with gardens is that food will grow almost anywhere, right? And actually, like on our own property, we had this part of this front lawn that was just ugly front lawn. And maybe my neighbors, they like having a fresh mowed lawn, but we've now dug up almost all of that lawn, and we've got fruit trees, we've got blueberry bushes, raspberry bushes, we've got plum, apricot, figs, We have a grape arbor. So we're literally in the process of converting our lawn into gardens, and these gardens are going to feed us, right? So instead of going to the store and saying, "Oh, hey, wow, there's no more raspberries because the raspberries were grown in Mexico and the supply chain is shut down because the fuel cost is too big to bring a pint of raspberries from Mexico," I'm growing them in my own front yard. But the key point here, folks, is that during those times, whether it was the Great Depression, during the wars, the government was taking care of its citizens. And that allowed the Americans to be resilient because we had the support of the government. We are in an opposite situation now. We are in literally the opposite situation where not only is the government not telling us the important things that we need to be doing. I mean, even Trump with the megaphone that he has, why isn't he talking about this? He must know there's a coming food crisis. And I'm not trying to look, I have a strong Trump supporter, and I'm not going to get into that, but it makes me wonder, why aren't I've seen so few politicians actually even touch on this, let alone the entire Biden administration, let alone most of the mainstream media, where they're actually hiding a lot of this information. And a lot of the media and my research are saying, oh, there is no food crisis. And here I'll show you, case in point, check this out. So this is the USDA website. This is the official United States Department of Agriculture. You would think that if there was a food crisis that was heading towards America that was going to affect all of us, that this would be the place to go, right? You'd want to go right here and read about it. So let's just see what the USDA has to say about the coming food crisis, because I would think that as the organization responsible for farming in America and food production in America, that they would be saying every American should be growing a garden to their capacity, storing food, etc. That's what you would think. What do they say, though? Well, let's come in here. Will there be food shortages? Here's the answer from the USDA. There are currently no nationwide shortages of food, although in some cases, the inventory of certain foods at your grocery store might be temporarily low before stores can restock. Food production and manufacturing are widely dispersed throughout the U.S., and there are currently no widespread disruptions reported in the supply chain. Here's the kicker. USDA and the Food and Drug Administration, I trust those guys about as far as I can throw them, are closely monitoring the food supply chain for any shortages in collaboration with industry and our federal and state partners, probably like the FBI and CIA. They're really trustworthy. We are in regular contact with food manufacturers and grocery stores. So, okay, great. So according to our own government, there are no food shortages, right? Sorry, folks, show's over. There's no food shortages. The USDA says so. Unfortunately, that's not the case. But this is a very telling point, folks, because this is our own government telling us, right? And maybe you have friends and family that they just trust the government. Maybe they trust them. Maybe a little bit, they trust the CDC. They might go to the USDA. You might say, look, Dad, please watch this Man in America guy. He's talking about these food crisis and, you should really be growing a garden. And maybe he then goes online and he says, well, son, I went to the USDA and they said there's no food shortages. I mean, this is criminal. This is criminal. There's no way around it. This is absolutely criminal. And here's the bigger point. Go back to Biden. Okay, look at, if you remember Biden's campaign slogan, remember what that was? Build back better, right? Build back better, build back better. You saw it all over the world. You saw all these politicians promoting their Build Back Better campaign, right? Trudeau, Boris Johnson, you saw it all over the world. And it was all over Biden. Even the whitehouse.gov, it has this whole Build Back Better campaign promise. So it looks like, though, he's not really trying to build back anything. It seems like his campaign is more like destroy America as quickly as possible and do it better, right? Better than Obama, better than Bush, better than all the others, except for Trump, because Trump actually was trying to save America, but that's a different story. We're talking about food today. But Biden was part of the global ring of people that are pushing us towards the Great Reset, towards the one world government. And if you look at the article I showed you from RT talking about the WTO, the World Trade Organization, and how they're framing this as a polycrisis, and they're already seeding what they want to do. What they want to do is they want to basically destroy as much of the world as possible our supply chain system, our financial system. And we're not even going to get into the financial system today because that's a whole other can of worms, right? But their goal is to basically destroy all these old systems that we've really relied on that have allowed us to have a society and structure and growth and some semblance of happiness and order in our lives because they want to replace it with their system. And so Biden, if you look at what's happening, it's if even if you look at the food crisis, right? And look, folks, if you're looking at the whole idea of devolution, is Trump still in control? Look, I will be the first to admit, at one point early on, shortly after the election, I was convinced that Trump was still really, really active in controlling a lot of what was happening in America. And I even thought there was a chance that a lot of what we were seeing happen was actually being shown, it was being allowed to happen. It was being allowed to happen to wake people up, to show people, so people would really they would really accept whatever came out of the election results and the correction of all that and the audits and the cyber symposium and all that. But what you can see right now is that this is not like, okay, Biden bungling Afghanistan. Okay, you can make an excuse for it. What's happening right now is America is being put into a nosedive. And that nosedive will end up collapsing our food systems, our financial systems, and that's what Biden is doing. The actions of Joe Biden, he's not just some guy in a latex mask that's like playing a role. He's actively like undoing America as we know it. And if you look at the food systems, again, the point being that, yeah, he's not out there saying, hey, grow a victory garden. Instead, he's canceling the oil drilling. He's canceling the Keystone Pipeline. He's putting sanctions on Ukraine, which his advisors would have had to have told him. Would have had to have told him, hey, Joe, if you do this, if you put sanctions on Ukraine, there's a good chance that Russia's going to, sorry, not Ukraine, but sanctions on Russia, right? If you put in place these sanctions on Russia, they're gonna respond, and they're probably gonna collapse our food system because we actually get a lot of our fertilizer from them. So the government is not here to help us like they were in the first half of the last century or the beginning of last century, and in fact, they're playing the opposite role. And so I'm sure that if you've been watching Man in America, and as you are right now, you're probably not one of these people that's pro-government anyway. So you're probably like, hey, I want my Second Amendment. I want, less government. But so I want to talk more now because I could keep going into all the crazy things about why there is a food crisis coming. Right? As I mentioned before, we had even animal feed costs, like she said in the video, that the feed that she was buying, the woman was buying for her chickens, used to be around $180 for whatever quantity. Maybe it was 500 pounds. I forget what it was. It's now over $400. My wife and I are experiencing the same thing and trying to buy feed for our chickens. It's doubling price. It's doubling price. So right now you can go to the grocery store and you can buy a dozen eggs for $3.50. But as she said in that video, eggs could very well be $12, $1 an egg by the end of the year. And it's not just eggs. It has a domino effect on everything. So this is very, very real. But we have to look at this and say, okay, what can we do, right? How can we prepare for this? Because, look, we are Americans, and I think that there are a large portion of Americans that are actually awake and that they're aware. Look, where I live out in the country, I can tell you there's so many Americans that see what's happening. And so many of the folks I talk to, they see exactly what's happening and they're preparing for it. So I know, I know that if you turn on the TV, or you see, flicking through social media and you see that Christina Aguilera is out there wearing a dildo, doing some disgusting thing at a gay pride celebration in California. It feels sometimes like that's the cultural trend and the cultural tone of America. And that's depressing because you look at that like, this isn't my country. But actually the reality is, in my experience too, is that when you go out in there in the world, especially if you live, I live in a more rural area, that Americans they're resilient and they're fighting and they really, really, really want to take control of this country again. I think that we will, but again, it's going to be some difficult times ahead of us. So I want to spend the next, kind of portion of today's show really talking about the fundamentals of food security, because I think, and again, looking at timeline, and this is the question I see a lot of people that are asking, like, well, when is this going to hit? When are we going to see this? My personal assessment based upon research, from women like this or other things I'm researching as well, I think that what we're going to see is as we head into the fall, that you're going to see definitely you're going to see a change in your grocery stores. I'm not going to say it's going to be an empty store, but you're going to realize that that bread you usually like to buy, no longer making it. Those chips you like, no longer there. The ice cream no longer there. You're going to look at the egg section and you're going to see, there's half the normal amount of eggs. You're probably already seeing that. But what I do think is going to happen, and this is why it's important to prepare now while we can, is that I think that stores are going to start rationing. And that's going to be the big thing. Because right now, I can go to the grocery store, and if butter is on sale, like I happen to like Kerrygold butter. So if butter is $3 for a little 8-ounce bar as opposed to $4.50, I might buy like 30 of those things of butter because I have to stick them in the freezer and I have butter, right? But the problem is what we're going to start seeing, and what we're already seeing, is you're going to go to the grocery store and it's going to say, due to supply chain issues, or however they phrase it, that there is a limit of 2 purchases of butter, 2 purchases of milk. You're even going to see it with canned food. Again, right now you can go to Kroger or whatever. Kroger is more of a Midwestern grocery store, or wherever you go to in your area. And maybe you can buy a can of beans, organic beans, for $1. Okay, great. You can spend $50, buy 50 cans of beans, stick those in your basement somewhere. Great. But you're going to see pretty soon, if not already happening, they're going to say, look, there's a limit of 2 cans of beans per person. And this is going to make it really difficult, because even if you want to be proactive and you want to start putting aside some food for your family, well, if you can only buy 2 cans of beans at once, it's going to be real tough to build up a supply of that, right? So that's why right now is the important time to look at this. So I want to look at just a few basics of food security. Now, the most important aspect of food security, in my own opinion, is learning how to grow your own food. Now, let's say that you live in an apartment. Well, you can get little hydroponic indoor systems. If you have even a window, you can use the light from the window. There are so many things that you can do even in a little apartment, and not to mention sprouting. So you can have a little sprouting setup. There is a channel, which I'll share again on my Telegram. There's a guy named William Welker, who is a fantastic, fantastic resource. And he has a few different channels on Telegram that he goes all into this. But sprouting is something that you can do, which requires very, very little space. It's very inexpensive, but they're so nutritionally dense, the sprouts that you grow, that they can really play a major role in feeding your family. The other thing is, I have a lot of people that are commenting and they'll say, look, I'm on a really, really, really tight budget. Like, I can't afford to buy any extra food. And that's what I wanted to talk about first with the overall food, kind of food production, is that there are definitely resources that you can use. And look, if you're truly like at poverty level, say you've got 4 kids and you're making, $18,000 a year in a small area, whatever it looks like, you can even go to the local food banks. You can go to the local food bank. You can get canned goods there. You can sign up. You can try to get onto EBT or SNAP. And look, I'm not one to encourage, kind of suckling off the welfare teat of the government. But if you're a hardworking American and you're trying to get by, and we know that the government has intentionally put us under the boot and they've made it really difficult for us, if you're going and you're using your EBT and you're strategically getting canned goods and dry food so that you can store those away for your family, good for you. Look, I'm all for trying to take advantage of the government when they give us the opportunity to, right? Because all the robbery and the taxation from us, like we'll never be able to reclaim all that. So if you have an opportunity like that, if you're really in that kind of situation, that's your only option, please go do that. But anyway, back what I was talking about with gardening, though. Gardening is one of the most important skills that you can learn. And you can start learning right now, even if you've never done it. There are so many books and resources and blogs about it. Please, please, please try to start your own garden. If you want a good book, I brought a few books to show you. This is one excellent book. It's called How to Grow More Vegetables, right? You can find this online, all over the place. And if you need to, just search for how to. So How to Grow More Vegetables. You can find that book all over the place. That's a great, great book. And there's so many books that are just like this that will show you the fundamentals of how to get gardening. So I was going to show you a video, but didn't really turn out right, which we'll be doing that in the future. I'll be showing you more videos. If you follow me on Telegram, I show you, I gave you a little tour of our raised bed gardening system. So it's something that we're taking very seriously, and I'm trying really hard to inspire people to get their garden started, because you'll be amazed. You'll be amazed. Like even like kale, we have these kale seeds, they're tiny little seeds, and Kate had grown some indoors, got them started heading into the winters with some little basic grow lights. We now have a garden of kale outside that is producing more kale than we can even eat. I mean, it's like overflowing. We're making kale salads, we're making sauteed kale. It's incredible how with these little seeds that God gave us, that nature will give so much back to us. So gardening is such an important part of this. And if you can learn to garden, even planting fruit trees, planting berry bushes, raspberries, blueberries, you can go to Lowe's and Home Depot. Like I just finished putting in 12 grape plants. These grape plants, I think, were like $7 a piece, and they won't produce this year, but next year they'll be producing grapes. So again, if there is food shortages, which are coming down the pipeline, if you can grow your own food, not only will you be able to feed your family, but think about this. Think about this. If you raise your own chickens, which we do, they keep replicating because the eggs are hatching. But if you have your own chickens, well, if eggs are $12 a dozen by the end of the year, and you need an extra source of income, and say you've got 25 or 30 chickens, and those chickens are giving you 15 to 20 eggs a day, maybe you can start selling some of your eggs to your neighbors, right? So there's going to be a lot of opportunities if you're industrious and you really want to put the time into it, that you can do this. It's really, really key. And if you have any questions about chickens, there's also on Telegram, I will share, there's a really fantastic chicken group that I follow called Make Chickens Great Again. It's a wonderful group. But you can learn, even if you have a small amount of space, you can even raise quail, right? Quail is another bird that they're prolific in their egg laying. You can eat them. So the key, though, is that whether it's gardening or starting to look at raising small animals, or even looking into raising rabbits per meat, which is a fantastic meat source, these are all ways that we can become self-sufficient, which is really, really important, because if you look at what's happening globally, right, when they're trying to collapse these systems, that collapse of that system will affect you to the degree that you're dependent on that system. So for people that are not producing their own food at all, say they go to the grocery store every 2 or 3 days, and they just go there and they're buying whatever they need, that grocery store never really carries more than a couple of days worth of food. So what happens after a true collapse of the supply system, that store could be empty in a couple of days. So if you're someone that is thinking like that, you can really do so much for yourself to prepare for whatever is coming. So the other thing I want to talk about, though, is just how you're eating. And this is a key, right? This is a very, very important thing, because if you look back, one of the best resources I would recommend is just reading up on what people were doing during the Great Depression. So I have a book here to show you. This is called Clara's Kitchen. And it is wisdom, memories, and recipes from the Great Depression. Hold up so you can see it there in focus. So called, again, Clara's Kitchen. Now, this is just one of many books that go into what life was like during the Great Depression, but more importantly, how they ate during the Great Depression. So this is a key. So if you're used to, if say you're for your family's groceries, you're used to going to the grocery store, say once a week, and you're buying, pre-made meals or whatever you're buying. If you look into your pantry and you see labels and labels and labels, like you're buying a lot of food that's already been processed, that's going to be the much more expensive food. If you look into our pantry, what you mostly see is giant glass jars, whether they're half gallon or gallon or more, of just raw materials, dried beans, flour. We've got a kombucha. We do homemade kombucha. Spices. Spices are an absolute key in making your rice and your beans taste good, right? And also there's all kinds of medicinal benefits to spices as well. But the point is that going back to the Depression era cooking, or say you watch Little House on the Prairie, their food requirements were so simple. And if you can change even how you feed your family, it can make a drastic difference in what you're able to preserve and what you're able to set aside, and how you'll fare if there is during the time of a food crisis. Like as an example, you can make egg noodles. egg noodles are very, very simple. I make them sometimes and they're fantastic. It's literally just egg, flour, and water. You mix them together and you can fry them up. You can boil them. There's all kinds of things you can do with them. But if you go back to that way of thinking, I have some examples to show you here because I want to pull up something shortly. So looking at purchasing, right? You can go to Costco and you can buy right here. This is for $13, you can get 25 pounds of flour, right? So I see there's a lot of people that are saying, I can't afford to prep. Well, it's like, look, for $13, you can buy 25 pounds of flour. So if you learn to bake bread, if you get a starter, like that's something that we do every other day, we've got a fresh sourdough, beautiful sourdough loaf coming out of the oven. Because Kate, she found a starter on eBay. You can get starters anywhere for next to nothing. And if you do the sourdough method, it's really, really easy. All you're doing is you're taking your bread and you're adding flour and water, and that's all it takes. And then you bake it. And salt, which is, that's everything to stock up on is salt. So if you can learn these more traditional ways of eating, you'll find that let's just say you spend $100 on some basic food supplies like flour, salt, etc. That $100 could actually probably give you $500 or $1,000 worth of food that you're currently purchasing. So this is a big thing in shifting how you're approaching eating. Now, another thing is that, so here we had flour. So rice, again, right here, this is just, in Costco, is you can get here, this is a 20-pound bag of rice for $22. Now, I'm seeing that rice prices are slowly increasing, but again, now this is dry rice. This is 20 pounds of dry rice. If you have that, say you have some canned beans, you add some spices to it. Say you buy some chicken broth, which has a really long shelf life, pour that in. You can really learn to feed your family for so much less than what you're probably used to. Now, the other thing, actually, I had one on our website to show you when I was talking about gardening, is seeds. So when you're looking into growing, seeds are gold. Now, this is a website that I use. It's called Fedco Seeds. I use them. I think actually my sister, who's a fantastic gardener, she recommended them at one point. But we get really, really good germination seed results here. So if you plant, say, 25 seeds, probably 22 of them will sprout, as long as you have the right sprouting conditions, which is a different kind of lesson and skill to learn and to research. But this is where we've had a lot of luck with seeds. And so here you can buy, not going into the details of it, but you could buy perhaps, say you can get 200 seeds for bush beans, and it might cost you $8 or $10 or $5 or $10 for 200 seeds. Those seeds will give you so much. Those seeds will give back to you so much. So this is another just really, really important point, is that you go back to the basics, right? To go forward, we have to go backwards. There was an old legend of a Chinese kind of Taoist master named Zhang Guolao. And this guy would always, ride his donkey backwards. So, while we would ride donkey, you're facing forward, he was always facing backwards. And people didn't understand why he did that. But what he was doing is that he was showing is that when you're going forward, you're actually going backwards. And it was really a lesson that he was trying to impart to humans, that the more you're advancing away from nature and away from tradition, you're actually going backwards. So it feels like we're going forward. And I think that that's, in a lot of ways, that's the time that we're in right now. We're in this period of time where we are, you could call it a reset, though I hate using the whole great reset, but humanity has gone very, very far away from its tradition. We've gotten very far away from our roots. A lot of us don't know how to grow food anymore. A lot of us don't know how to do basic tasks anymore. Doesn't mean we can't learn, but the humankind, which has really in a lot of ways been guided by very dark forces through the media, through Hollywood, through culture, through the educational system, they have really, really deliberately been leading us away from God and away from tradition and away from the way of life that God imparted to us. And so while it's really frightening, this time that we're entering into, when you think about food crisis or financial collapse or all that, in a lot of ways, if you look at it, what's collapsing is the modern system. What's collapsing is their system. even the food systems. What's collapsing and is the giant Monsanto monocrop food system. Now, of course, small farms are having a really difficult time because they're still relying on the grains and the fertilizer, et cetera. But in reality, it's this giant system that they've built to control us because, they want to herd us into their way of controlling the earth through their central banking, digital currency, through the blockchain tracking. So they see exactly what you're eating through the social credit system. So they're trying to move us into that. But what I actually believe is happening is that humankind is going to be returning back to how it was supposed to be living. Because even if you rewind to say you think, oh, the 80s were great, the 90s were okay, the 70s were fantastic, we were already so far away from how we're supposed to live. Like, go watch Little House on the Prairie. I highly recommend it. One of my favorite shows. Go look at how they live. Look at the resilience of them. No one can possibly tell them that a guy it can be a woman and a woman can be a man. Because you look at what Charles does. You look at what he does to work to support the family. There's no way that all that transgender BS could exist back then because it was survival. It's like looking into nature, right? You look at nature, nature tells us, like, nature is in a lot of ways, it's God's creation untouched by man, whereas mankind has really screwed up mankind and they're leading us off a cliff, which we're going to correct because we're returning to tradition together and we're realizing that we've gotten too far away from that. But if you look at nature, go try telling a buck deer with horns on it, the antlers on its head, and it's 3 times the size as a doe. Try telling that deer that he can be a doe. It doesn't work like that. Like, nature shows us what is real. And so, though this time that we're in right now is very, very difficult, it's going to be a process of us returning back to tradition. We're going back to our roots. We're going back to where we belong. And I believe that though that the times ahead are going to be really difficult, once we go back to that way of living, and I'm not implying that we're going to be, using horse and buggies and all that kind of stuff. I'm not sure what's on the other side of this, but it's going to be something that's going to be more beautiful than you could have ever imagined. So, back to a few more. We've got about 10 minutes left before we jump over onto Rise TV for the Q&A session, specifically about everything to do with prepping and even other things if you want to discuss it with me. But one thing I think I want to talk about with food production is food storage. And so this is another key area. So say that you have a great garden. Like right now, we probably have over 100 tomato plants. I got a little bit crazy buying tomato plants. I think Kate also got crazy planting the tomato seeds, and she blames me, I blame her, but now we've got like over 100 tomato plants. But it's like, once we have all these tomatoes, what do we do with them? All right. Once we have all these beans, what do we do with them? So obviously that storing your food is a really, really important part as well. Now, if you're just buying, I know a lot of people, they look at, say, companies like My Patriot Supply, or they look at these like the buckets, right? Now, I'm not going to knock those, because if you don't have a lot of time and you have a lot of extra money, those are a pretty good resource. But just being very honest with you, the Patriot type buckets are going to be much more expensive than if you buy the raw materials on your own. That's just how it works, right? Because they deserve to make money because they're assembling these pre-made buckets for you. So if you're buying those, look, they've got 20, 25-year shelf life. They're actually a really good backup for just having some extra calories sitting around. But if you're not going that route, food preservation is really, really important. So I'll give you a few quick tips about that. So one is that if you like I mentioned, say you went to Costco, which is what I do. I've got a Costco membership, and I think it was maybe 2 months ago, I bought like 150 pounds of flour. It was a lot of flour, right? So if you just take that flour and you just stick it in your cupboard, what's going to happen is you're going to go back to it maybe 6 months or a year later when you got to use it, and you're going to find it's full of eggs. It's going to be full of little bugs. Maybe mice got into it. So it's very, very important that whether it's flour or dried beans or rice, that you have ways of preserving it. So there's a handful of ways of doing that, but I'll tell you what I do, my method. So there's something called diatomaceous earth. And I'm going to make a little video about this at a separate time. So diatomaceous earth is basically, it's ground up kind of fossilized crustaceans. But what it is, though, is that the crustacean parts of these crustaceans, I guess you could say, they're like little razor blades, and they're actually not bad for human consumption. In fact, if you have parasites, like you have worms or something, you can put a little diatomaceous earth powder into your smoothie, and it'll help get rid of these parasites inside of you. But what it does is that if you mix a little bit in with your rice or your beans before you store it, if a little egg hatches in there, because just being real, if you buy a bag of dried beans, there are eggs in there. There's bugs in there. That's just, they can't not have it. It's life. Right. And so that's what happens is that if you look at it 6 months later, you see all these little webby things and you see little worms in there because they hatch and they start eating off of the organic material in there. So if you use diatomaceous earth, what you do is say, in a 5-gallon bucket of rice, you mix in about a cup or so of this diatomaceous earth powder and you stir it all around. And what happens is that if an insect hatches, the diatomaceous earth, those little razor blades get inside of the exoskeleton of the bugs and they basically kill them. So it really, you can get rid of the bug issue. So what we do is you get your dry goods, mix in diatomaceous earth and you can seal it in a 5-gallon bucket, a 2-gallon bucket, or if you want to, you can also get Mylar bags with the little oxygen absorbers. You put them into the Mylar bags, you get your oxygen absorbers, you get your diatomaceous earth, you seal them up, then you can store those in buckets. That's a great way. So there's the point being is that if you're going to be storing grains and dry food like that, you have to do a little bit of prep work. Don't just buy a bag of flour and stick it in your pantry and expect that a year from now it's going to be usable. Canned goods are fantastic. So canned goods have a really long shelf life. Just make sure that you have extra can openers. You don't want to be in a situation where your one can opener broke, right? So there's that old military saying, I think it is, that one is none and two is one, right? So if you have one, if it breaks, you've got none. If you've got two, if it breaks, you've got one. So I went on Amazon, I ordered a pack of, I think there's like 15 of these just little basic military style can openers just as backup. So canned food, fantastic. If you can go to Costco, I get a lot of canned food from Costco. It stores really well. That's one thing. What was that, Kate? Oh, Aldi also. So she's in my ear and she always gives me little tidbits. Also Aldi. So I'm not sure if you've got Aldi in your area. Also very, very inexpensive. You can get bulk stuff there. Great stuff. So you have canned foods, you have your dried foods, you have jars. If you have jars of pasta sauce, jars of vegetables, jars of fruit preserves, etc. Those are going to be key. Store those away. I'm not going to be getting into water in today's discussion because I'm mostly focusing on the food system, the food crisis. But water is also really, really important, and I go into that in some of my other shows on prepping. But those are your core things that you're storing for dry food. Now, the other question though is what do you do with your food if you grow it? Like, how can you grow your food, or even say you want to go to the grocery store and get a bunch of vegetables, say fresh vegetables or frozen vegetables. How can you do that? So one is that, yes, say you've got unlimited freezer space, you can always just freeze everything. Me personally though, we're trying to pull things out of our freezer because say there's a longer term scenario where the grid is down. I don't want to be relying on powering 3 giant freezers in my garage. Actually power right now is out all across Ohio. Actually, my show was supposed to be yesterday, but the power was down. Now, thankfully, we have a Generac generator. We have a whole house generator, but our internet was down. And right now, all across Ohio, power is still down. So if you've got even $1,000 worth of food sitting in your freezer and you don't have a generator, if your power's out for more than a day, all that food is done. So just be kind of aware of that. But when you're growing food, or say you're getting things from the store, there's a handful of ways that you can use to preserve that food for long-term storage. One of the most traditional methods is canning, right? You buy a pressure cooker. It's a canning device. They're pretty inexpensive. And you have your glass ball jars. Like I grew up, my great-grandmother had an entire cellar under her house full of jars of everything she grew for that season, right? So like I said, Kate and I there's no way we're going to eat 5,000 tomatoes that we're going to have coming really soon, right? But we eat a lot of bolognese, we eat a lot of pasta, we eat a lot of things that require tomato sauce. So we're going to take those tomatoes, we're going to can as much as we can because those canned tomatoes will last a very long time. You can also get a dehydrator, so you can dehydrate your food. You can make like little fruit roll-ups, you can dehydrate fruit, etc. Or you can also get a freeze dryer. So freeze dryers are more expensive, but you can take a chicken breast and you can cut it up into little cubes. You can freeze dry it, put it into a glass jar, and you've now got chicken that'll last you like 20 years. And so you pull it out, you're making a soup, you throw it in the soup, it reconstitutes, it gets the water back in it, and now you've got chicken soup, right? So you can literally go and take advantage of the chicken, which, folks, chicken is going to be a rare commodity. I think they're really going after the chicken supply system. The chicken farms are burning down. So if we're seeing eggs at $12 a dozen, right now I can buy locally organic chicken breasts for $8 a pound maybe. So that might be $16 a pound, $20 a pound. So anything that you can buy right now, if you're able to, and you can reserve it in the proper way, that's going to be key. And that's how I look at it too. And I know it's tough. And look, everyone has a different financial position, right? And so maybe you're one of the people that you're going to be going to the food pantry. Fantastic. Be proactive. Pray on it. God will take care of you the best that he can. Very good. But if you have the money right now, and that's how I look at it, I'm looking at look, why not buy 100 cans of beans? They're $1 a can for 100 cans of beans. These cans of beans might be $3 a can in the next 12 months. So I'm trying to hedge against that, because if you look at the fact of you have two things working against you, you've got inflation, which is that's a whole other monster to look at. So you have the value of our dollar that's decreasing, which is why I recommend gold and silver. I'm not just trying to sell you something. That's exactly what I do. If I have a little extra money, I go buy a few ounces of silver or whatever it is. So you have that happening at the same time you're going to see spikes in food costs. So it is like a double whammy. It's a perfect storm that's going to really, really make it difficult for us. So, folks, we have been going on for an hour now, which is hopefully it's been fun. I mean, look, I know that the food crisis stuff is frightening. Like it is. It's scary. But I've actually smiled quite a bit in this episode because I do have a lot of hope. And one thing I will say, I want to put just one statement out there. There's a lot of people, they think that prepping is buying a bunch of guns and ammo and buying a bunch of canned food and sitting in your basement. And look, I've been in that mindset before, but I really, really believe that what's going to come out of what's coming next is a lot of communities are going to be rebuilt. You're going to have neighborhoods working together. And even as Kate and I, we have about 5 acres. And even as we're planting and we're turning our property into something that produces food, we're thinking, you know what? I want to bring our neighbors here. I want to bring them here. I want to show them how we're doing this. I want to teach them how we're gardening. I want to bring their kids here and let their kids learn about gardening. This is an opportunity. If you're someone that you see this coming, this is an opportunity for us to help all those people around us. And so, look, may we get into some Mad Max scenario where it's like, truly the survival of the fittest? Maybe. But I don't believe it'll get to that place. I think that what's going to happen is it's going to be difficult, but I think a lot of people will come together. And so look at it like that. Try to think about it like that way. Think about how can I help my neighbors? And, something that actually, again, kind of kudos to Bards FM. He talks a lot about giving out seed packages that, look, if a neighbor comes to you and says, hey, I see you're gardening, can I have some vegetables or whatever? Give them seeds, right? Teach them how to fish. So I just think that if you can come into it with that perspective, it's a very fundamental shift in how you are thinking about things, because you're not thinking about your neighbor as your enemy. And that's the thing, is that for a lot of people, prepping turns them into someone that's paranoid, that views their neighbor as their enemy. But let's instead try our best to look at this and say, you know what? My neighbor is someone that is my neighbor for a reason, and I'm going to try my best to help them in any way that I can. And I think that it's going to be, if everyone can adopt that kind of attitude, and if when you're growing, you think you can grow that extra bit more, I really think that we can get through this. So now, if you live like in the middle of New York City, maybe your neighbor's probably going to be your enemy, right? Because the amount of food that is not going to be there and the amount of criminals that are in a city like that, you might want to be looking at, it's like, hey, let me make my friend upstate my friend. Let me get out of this area. So, all right. So folks, we are now going to head over to Rise TV for a Q&A, and we'll let it go as long as your questions keep coming. A lot of times it's half an hour, 45 minutes, an hour. But I want to talk to you. I want to hear, what are your actual concerns? What are you struggling with? Do you have a particular question? Are you trying to decide between whether to, kind of push yourself for the budget of a freeze dryer versus a good dehydrator? Let's talk about this. Let's talk about water, even guns and ammunition. Let's talk about all this together. That's over on Rise TV. So folks, for those of you that are watching on Rumble, YouTube, Facebook, etc., as you can see, I will continue to do as much as I can on these free platforms because I do not want to lose you. I want to keep being able to talk to you and help spread this information. If you do want to support my work as Man in America and become part of Rise TV, which is $10 a month, there's a free trial in the description below. It is an amazing community of patriots, of people that love America. They love our freedoms. They love God. It's just an amazing community. We have an incredible amount of other content on there, but I also do a lot more of these exclusive Q&As on there. And because it's a smaller community, you'll get your question answered over there. So if you want to come join us, again, it's over on Rise TV. There's a link below in the description for a free trial. And look, if you can't join Rise, I understand, because look, gas is $6-7 a gallon in a lot of areas. These are tough times. So if you still want to support, you can help by sharing this content. Send this video to a friend, friend or family member. That would be fantastic. And if you're watching on YouTube and Facebook, please try to come over to Rumble. Like, please, please, please. Rumble's a fantastic platform, and I can talk about everything on there. And they support patriots. So if you can, please stop using those other platforms as much as you can, at least, and try to come over to